When you work them all together, cultural systems link every group to their beliefs, to their languages, to their environment, but most importantly, it links them to themselves. I understand who I am because I understand these acceptable behaviors and patterns and things. If you change the wording a little bit, Ktunaxa cultural systems, they link the Ktunaxa people, the Ktunaxa sense-making systems, knowledge creation systems, community building systems. And if you take any one part of those out, those critical frameworks, something really terrible happens. They know now that you can't study language without culture. It doesn't work. They're inextricable. You pull one out, you kill the other. It's a complex system. If you try and take any one part of this out, you can have a language, but you can have no sense of community. Well, that speech community will die immediately. Because if I'm not comfortable talking with other people that have a sense of community, I'm not going to communicate with them. If you try and take sense out of a conversation, it's not going to go well. If you try and take people out of a group, all of these things kind of fall apart. In the last 10 years, a lot of research is moving towards the general conclusion that if you're going to study any problem, you have to know at least a little bit about each one of these. It's the same as Hutchins, who is another guy that I got to listen to at MIT, had a really great term. He called it a cultural cognitive ecosystem. You know what happens if you have an ecosystem and you drain the lake? You're going to mess up the rest of your ecosystem. If you have wetlands and you let beaver dams fill them all up, the water doesn't flow, you're going to kill them. If you take any one of these components from a group of people, you're going to make that ecosystem that pulls them together fall apart. Most of science, since Aristotle up to about 40 years ago, was about breaking things down into little components. I understand language because I keep breaking it down into little tiny bits and pieces and components. And then they realized about the mid-1970s, you can't understand language unless you understand the philosophy that goes with it, because that's where the context comes from. If we think of culture as this thing that gives us the stability, what happens when we destabilize it? When a community, this is one of my favorite quotes, my dissertation, this is page 1. When a community loses its language, it often loses a great deal of its cultural identity at the same time. And even though you're never supposed to start a chapter for any dissertation with a block quote, I did it anyway. And my committee let it stand because they said, yeah, okay, I guess it works. You're never supposed to do that, but I did it anyway. The idea is what I just said. If you try and take language out of a group, the identity, there's no way to maintain that cooperation, that cultural, cognitive ecosystem, that thing that makes all of those speakers who they are, tends to go away. Cultural identity has been linked to peaceful cooperation between groups. Two groups that are really comfortable with their beliefs, their values, their practices, they can interact together because they're pretty firm. This is what I believe and I understand. This is what's appropriate for me. This is what's inappropriate for me. And the other group says the same thing. So you get them together and really early on they say, okay, if our businesses work together, these are what work for us, and these are the things that are causing tension. They can identify that really easily. There are parts that work together great, and there are some things where there's going to be problems. The less people are comfortable or confident in their culture, the higher the likelihood that there's going to be volatility. People with a strong sense of cultural identity are more likely to interact with respect for the other's value systems. I know how I feel when somebody violates my comfort zones. So I'm not going to do that to anyone else. It just kind of makes sense. When you cooperate with someone, when you're interacting with someone, if there's something that doesn't feel good to you, you're probably not going to do it to someone else. Unfortunately, I really kind of get frustrated, but most of the literature on cultural intelligence is all from a business standpoint, which just is crazy to me because it just shows that businesses are trying to be more comfortable moving into other cultural groups, which is a little bit sad. But there was one decent book that came out by Plum, and she described a version of cultural intelligence, noting that it's the ability to act appropriately in situations where cultural differences are important. One of the things to come out of this work is the idea that this idea of cultural intelligence, the more intelligent I am about my values, my system, my history, my language, the more competent I'm going to be. The more competent I am, the more confident I am in dealing with other people. And this kind of sounds like common sense. I mean, this is not something that we may need a book to prove to us. We can think back about maybe I had an interaction with someone, and because I was comfortable in my situation, I was okay interacting with them. The example that I want to use, we'll do a little thought experiment here. Think for a minute about 5th graders. I have a 5th grader at home. And she likes some mathematics. She likes addition, subtraction. She likes fractions now. She likes multiplication. And her and a couple of her friends really like the multiplication. They do not like the division. They do not understand the division. So imagine you're teaching this group of kids. There's 30 and there's 5 of them. Everyone understands multiplication. All but 5 of them understand division. What happens to those 5 kids when the teacher starts talking about division up on the board and writing equations and talking about it? What happens in the heads of those little kids? I can tell you right now, I would imagine that my daughter just starts drawing pictures. Because when it comes to division, she's pretty sure she doesn't need it. She is pretty sure that fractions have nothing to do with division, even though I've told her that that's not true. She then is a part of this group that cannot interact, is competent about mathematics as everyone else, or at least those other 25 students, and she's not as confident. If I talk to 2 students about mathematics, and one of them has trouble with division, and the other is really good with both, you'll see there's this confidence that one student has, and the other student, sooner or later, you start to see that something is not working for them. So now imagine it's half students. She's in a class. She's in 6th grade, and it's half 6th graders, half 5th graders. She does not like that. She thinks there should be all 6th graders in her class. So when I asked her how things were going, immediately her frustrations were when I was asking them about, they were doing a science project, I was asking her how it was going, and she said, the 5th graders are all way behind. Those kinds of things just happen because there's groups of people interacting, and there's just this funny thing that happens. There's one group that's really comfortable with one topic, and the other half of the group is not as comfortable. And sometimes if it's kids on a playground, that's not a big deal. If it's playing kickball, I don't know how, then you draw from those heuristics. Some of the kids teach you how, they show you what to do, and you get to be a part of it. Now, think about the opposite of that. You go to a speech thing. Gnata or Ksanka, however we want to say it. And now you destabilize that system. We already know that there's this ecosystem of sense-making, knowledge, and things. And now we're trying to change the gene sets like it.